Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Vanderpool. Today we're going to be talking about the Phillips curve, and the Phillips curve is basically a graphical representation of the trade-off that exists in the short run between unemployment and inflation. And so remember when we're talking about the short run, we're talking about that period of time when wages and other input costs are sticky. So let's talk about this Phillips curve. So in a 1958 paper, you had a New Zealand-born economist, A.W. Phillips. He published the results of his research on the historical relationship between the unemployment rate, expressed by the variable U percentage, and the rate of inflation, expressed by pi percentage, in Great Britain. And his research indicated a stable inverse relationship between the unemployment rate and the inflation rate. So as unemployment drops, the inflation rate goes up, and as the unemployment rate goes up, the inflation rate goes down. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at a Phillips curve. So what we're doing here is just plotting some data. So for our Phillips curve, we're going to have inflation on our y-axis, the unemployment rate on our x-axis, and then as you can see based on the data, you're going to have a downward sloping as you go left to right Phillips curve, which we will represent with the variable PC, standing for Phillips curve. And we're going to note here that inflation expectations are being held constant. I would also like to note that this Phillips curve is basically a line of best fit. So as you can see, we had various combinations of inflation and unemployment, and those are the dots. And then this Phillips curve is a line of best fit that best fits the points that have been plotted. So remember that the Phillips curve here, as unemployment goes down, inflation goes up. As unemployment goes up, inflation goes down. So this Phillips curve worked for a little while, but then in the 1970s, you had some problems with the Phillips curve. So in the 1970s, the United States experienced concurrently high unemployment and inflation. This is known as stagflation. We've already talked about that. 1976 American Nobel Prize economist Milton Friedman. We've already talked about him a little bit. We talked about him with the concept of monetarism. Saw stagflation as disproof of the stable Phillips curve. So instead of a trade-off between unemployment and inflation, Friedman believed, along with 2006 Nobel Prize recipient Edmund Phelps, that the natural rate of unemployment was independent of the inflation rate. And this independent relationship is now referred to as the long-run Phillips curve. So let's take a look at this long-run Phillips curve. So the long-run Phillips curve is going to look like this. We're going to have the inflation rate on our y-axis. We're going to have the unemployment rate on our x-axis. And then we are going to have a vertical long-run Phillips curve represented by the variable LRPC. And right below that, you're going to have UN percentage. That stands for the natural rate of unemployment. This is the rate of unemployment that is associated with full employment. And so notice here that the natural rate of unemployment is constant even when inflation is changing. So always remember that long-run Phillips curve is a vertical curve above the natural rate of unemployment. let's continue to talk about the long-run Phillips curve. So because the long-run Phillips curve exists at the natural rate of unemployment, UN, structural changes in the economy that affect the natural rate of unemployment will also cause the long-run Phillips curve to shift. So increases in the natural rate of unemployment will shift the long-run Phillips curve to the right. Decreases in the natural rate of unemployment will shift the long-run Phillips curve to the left. So at the natural rate of unemployment, you do not have any cyclical unemployment. But when the other types of unemployment change, it can change the natural rate of unemployment, thus changing and shifting the long-run Phillips curve. So one thing to keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, is that this long-run Phillips curve, however, at least in the problems we're going to be doing, is rarely going to be moving. All right, now let's talk about the short-run Phillips curve. So today, many economists reject the concept of a stable Phillips curve, but accept that there may be a short-term trade-off between unemployment and inflation, giving stable inflation expectations. So therefore, stable wages. So most believe that in the long run, unemployment and inflation are independent at the natural rate of unemployment. And market analysis shows that the short-run Phillips curve can shift left or right, and the key to understanding that is inflationary expectations. So going back to that curve we had at the beginning of the lesson, we can go ahead and really kind of recreate that curve, but we're going to call it the short-run Phillips curve, or SRPC. So our short-run Phillips curve is going to have inflation on the y-axis, it's going to have our unemployment on our x-axis, and we're going to have it downward sloping as you go left to right, short-run Phillips curve. And this short-run Phillips curve can shift left or right. So here, for example, we have it shifting to the right from SRPC to SRPC1. So let's say, for example, our short-run Phillips curve shift to the right here. Now you can see at the same level of inflation, you'd have a higher rate of unemployment. Now, probably the most important thing to remember about this short-run Phillips curve is it is going to move the opposite way of short-run aggregate supply. Okay, so if short-run aggregate supply shifts to the left, the short-run Phillips curve is going to shift to the right. If the short-run aggregate supply shifts to the right, the short-run Phillips curve shifted to the left. Okay, so in this case, because the short-run Phillips curve shifts to the right, that would mean that the short-run aggregate supply curve would have shifted to the left. So just remember that the Phillips curve is going to, at least the short-run Phillips curve, is going to move the opposite way of short-run aggregate supply. All right, now we're going to go ahead and reconcile the long-run Phillips curve as well as the short-run Phillips curve. Okay, so what we're going to have here is we're going to be reconciling this long-run Phillips curve and the short-run Phillips curve. So we have our inflation rate on our y-axis, we have our unemployment rate on our x-axis, we have our long-run Phillips curve, which is vertical above the natural rate of unemployment, and we have a downward sloping short-run Phillips curve, which intersects the long-run Phillips curve at a point A, and as you can see at point A, you are at an inflation rate and you're at the natural rate of unemployment. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say that there is a policy, it can be fiscal, it can be monetary, that is expansionary and thus is seeking to lower the unemployment rate. So let's say that policymakers pursue that expansionary policy, and therefore the economy moves to point B. Now this is happening in the short run when wages and input costs are sticky. You can see the unemployment rate went down, and you can see that the inflation rate went up. Now, when the unemployment rate went down, that went ahead and pushed wages up, because as the unemployment rate goes down, you have not very many people looking for work. And if employers want to hire those people, they have to pay them more. So this is going to push up wages. This pushing up of wages, of course, is going to increase input costs and is going to decrease short-run aggregate supply, shifting it to the left. Well, if the short-run aggregate supply shifts to the left, that means that the short-run Phillips curve is going to shift to the right. Remember, short-run Phillips curve shifts the opposite way of the short-run aggregate supply curve. So we're going to go ahead and shift the short-run Phillips curve to the right, back to the long-run Phillips curve, to point C. Now, it's important to point out that here, at point C, this has occurred in the long run. Wages and input prices have changed, so ultimately that shifted the short-run aggregate supply curve, and then the short-run Phillips curve shifted the opposite way of the short-run aggregate supply curve in the long run back to your long-run Phillips curve. And now you're back at your natural rate of unemployment with a higher level of inflation. So ultimately you ended up back at the natural rate of unemployment at point C. All right, let's try another reconciliation here. All right, so once again, we have a short-run Phillips curve intersecting a long-run Phillips curve at point A. We're at an inflation rate. We're at the natural rate of unemployment here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a policy to fight inflation, okay, to lower inflation. It could be either monetary, it can be fiscal, doesn't matter, but it's going to be a contractionary policy here. All right, and by doing that, you move from point A to point B, where you lowered inflation, and then you raised unemployment. Well, if you raise unemployment, that means you have a lot of people looking for work, so you're going to have to pay those people less, so wages are going to go down. If wages are going to go down, that would lower input cost, shifting short-run aggregate supply to the right. Well, if short-run aggregate supply shifts to the right, that means the short-run Phillips curve is going to shift to the left. So we're going to go ahead and shift that short-run Phillips curve to the left, and we will be at point C. So now we ended up back at the long-run Phillips curve at a lower level of inflation, inflation 1, but we're still at the natural rate of unemployment. So remember once again that as you went to A to B, that occurred in the short run when wages and input costs were sticky. And as we went from B to C, that occurred in the long run when wages and input costs became unsticky and thus were more fluid. So as you can see here, basically what's happening is that ultimately this short run Phillips curve, as you go from short run to long run, is just going to kind of be bouncing around the long run Phillips curve here, just kind of how like how the short run aggregate supply curve, when you go from short run to long run, is going to be moving around the long-run aggregate supply curve. All right, so let's relate this Phillips curve to ADAS. So changes in the ADAS model can also be seen in Phillips curves. So an easy way to understand how changes in the ADAS model affect the Phillips curves is to think about the two sets of graphs as mirror images. And we're going to go ahead and do that on the next video.